but never told me I love you. Never hugged me in my life. Never said anything that might build my ego. I instinctively knew what I did not have as a child, and my healing was to be everything my father wasn't to you.
You're listening to the Soul Podcast.
A special thanks to our friends over at Stanford Shaw for sponsoring this video.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Soul Podcast, where we talk all things that feed the soul. On these next set of episodes, we're talking about all things father and son. So, Dad, welcome back. How'd you find that episode we had last
Fantastic.
week?
It was good. It was good. It
you
brought up a
enjoy?
lot of emotions, and hey, we're using a bar. So nice here.
I know.
Hindi kami kasi umiinom. May bar kami pero hindi kami umiinom. But we do have the right drink.
For that.
So,
Amen. Cheers. Cheers.
Right.
Cheers. We'll dive into it a little bit more because there are so many things to unpack now with the subject of fatherhood, but it's not talked about enough. One of the things that we want to bring up would be for fathers, there are also a lot of societal pressures, I think, that you have to kind of fill, and it varies from generation to generation. What do you think was expected of you when you took on that fatherhood role?
This was so incidental. In other words, it's not like I was following a certain structure. You get married, you have a wife, you have a child, you are now expected to provide, you are now going to raise a son. None of that was there. It just sort of like happened. So before I knew it, I was already kind of like functioning as your dad, even before we got formally, recognized by the state. So I sort of just like moved into it. There were no pressures. As it was happening also, it was naturally coming out of me that I never knew I had, which was the ability to, okay, in the same way, I've been heading trumpets for so long. And before heading trumpets, I was basically just an actor. And then I got pushed into heading this group. And I didn't want to. But the moment that I did, I don't know, the leadership just came out. And I found out pala that I had the ability to lead people, to have vision. I never thought that I had vision. But it turns out, being a leader, that I realized that I'm gifted with vision, which means I see always ahead. It's the same thing with fatherhood. I didn't know I had what it took until it happened. And then you realize, oh, number one, I have the capacity to love pala, beyond myself. For the most part, I was a very self-centered artist. And all of a sudden, when you become a parent, you become other-centered. That's when I realized, oh, kaya ko palang magmahal beyond myself. And the more I looked to you, son, and focused on you, and just binuhusan lang kita ng time and love and care and provision, and the more I focus on you, the less I became. So I was just realizing as a person that, aside from the leadership, the same thing with leadership. When you're a leader, you're thinking already of everybody. You're not thinking about yourself. Yeah. So while that was happening for me as a trumpets leader, and also as a mover and shaker in my industry, I was also becoming a father. And again, it was already focused on you. So it was really life-changing for me, because it wasn't about me anymore. It was focused about you. And a lot of great things came out of that.
But I'm sure there were a lot of hardships that maybe you have had to go through as well. You have the permission to be very honest. But, it's one thing to kind of go into this thing with, for you, maybe not as much pressure, but for others, it's a daunting thing to take on fatherhood. But I'm sure as you're going through the journey, and, just for context, Dad and I are best friends. Like, we basically know everything there is to know about each other. We tell each other everything. We're very close. But of course, the dynamic was probably different when I was, younger. So, going through the stages of toddler, middle schooler, high schooler, college, having to see the shift and seeing your son grow. Were there any challenging times? Were there any times that you felt like maybe am I doing this properly, or am I doing something wrong?
Yeah, of course you learn. You don't know everything as you're going through it. I didn't know how to navigate being a padre de familia because remember, I just didn't take you in. I took
Yeah,
your
the whole
mom and your
family.
two sisters, and I really honestly didn't know how to be that for the whole household. It took a while for me to understand it, to figure it out. Um, but other than that, no, there were no real struggles or challenges. It just came easy. When you decide to love someone, it just comes out of you, and suddenly everything that I was doing had to do with you, raising you. I mean, he was the most enjoyable kid. Ngayon lang, I mean, people are teasing me now that at my age, I'm so digital. I'm always vlogging and all of that.
More than me. My gosh.
But even back then, all I did with those old phones was to just shoot you. And I have a lot of footage of him. He was just an incredibly funny, fun kid to be around. And I was enjoying every bit of it. I had never experienced that all my life. I had just been an artist, self-focused, and all of a sudden I'm taking care of this little toddler. I'm bringing him to the mall. I'm feeding him. I am watching him. There was one time we were in the mall and he disappeared. And can you imagine what kind of fear? I was nawala siya bigla. And it's, oh my God, he just got kidnapped. And then
What am I gonna tell his mom?
he just comes around like, oh, nothing happened. So I had a lot of that, just teaching you how to ride a bike, buying you toys, having remote control toys. I would take you around BGC nung wala pang laman doon.
Yeah.
And you would play with your,
off-road remote control. Something.
yeah, I have footage of that as well.
One of my favorite memories with Dad.
What are your memories as a child?
Kite flying, the BGC one for sure. Play shop. Going with you at rehearsals, actually. That was one of the more memorable ones.
Me being, supposedly the king of musical theater, head of trumpets and play shop. So he was about 3 years old or 3.5. Pinasok namin siya sa first play shop niya. And
around
his,
the
his role was a rabbit. He was a rabbit. This was in Music Museum and he had his recital. So there we go. There I am, proud dad. And there's David, proud tito, and we're watching 3.5-year-old Richard in his rabbit outfit. And yet they painted his face like a rabbit.
And again, Dad being head of trumpets and, supposed king of musical theater, of course, the expectation that you have for the son, right?
But here he is, all of a sudden, in the middle of this performance, gumaganyan na siya. Nakaupo siya doon with all the other rabbits sa kanya. Gumaganyan siya. What's going on? Gumaganyan siya. And then, every time they would have to move, the teachers would move. Ayaw niya mag-stand. The teacher kept lifting him, but he would, like, his legs would split because ayaw niyang tumayo.
Yeah.
And then at one point, in the middle of this performance, he just crawls off the stage and sits on my lap.
For the rest of the performance.
So there's David like, ang anak ng presidente ng trumpets just walked out of a performance. And then when it was time to hand out the what do you call it? The certificates, right? So being head, I stood there and was giving out the certificates to all the other kids. About Richard climbed up again and held onto my leg like, he's my dad. You can't get him. You can't, So no, but even that, no expectations. He's my kid. If he doesn't want to perform, that's fine. I'm good with that. I'd like to think I've never pressured you to be anything.
No.
But anything that you were interested as a child, I was there. So like there's another time nagbabike siya. He learning how to bike. And in this old neighborhood, when he didn't move in with me yet, naka-incline yung road, ang street. And he finally learned how to ride a bicycle without training wheels. We were all there watching him, and this kid comes down really fast, and then there's a hump at the end of this road. And I knew what was going to happen. And I was like, stop! Like slow mo, stop! And he hit it, and he flew in like slow motion. Those are things that a father goes through. It's not always just the happy stuff, but you go through the danger. You have to make sure you become a protector. A father has to be a protector. You have to be a provider, a protector.
But finding that balance, no, like I think what comes to mind when it's a father and son relationship, with the mamas, of course, they're there to nurture. So they're there to comfort your kid, take care of them and such. But with dads, you're supposed to go on adventures. You're supposed to let the kid be If he falls, he falls. If he fails, he fails. But
Right.
that's character building. So how do you, as a dad, because that must be difficult to watch, what are you thinking to yourself whenever there were moments like, let's say for me now, oh, I think something's, if he keeps going this way, something bad's gonna happen, but he has to learn. What do you think to yourself, or how do you hold yourself to, just letting me learn my lesson myself?
You just like brace yourself and then you let it happen. I had my own memories of growing up, and my dad was never around, and so I really really wanted to be around for him. I knew that at the very least yun ang pinaka-importante, na wherever he was I would be there. Every event I would be there. It's just being there for you regardless, right? So another thing is never judging your child, never having expectations towards your child. You just letting him be, letting him find himself.
Would you say then, like, as a dad, it's just to make sure to give your kid just enough space to explore, but also to enough space for you to be there in case he falls,
Right.
right? So let's talk about dynamics a little bit, because obviously, the dynamics changed from when I was a kid, talking to dad, asking him about everything and such. Now it's best friend like. We respect's always gonna be there, obviously, right? And that'll never disappear. But it was so refreshing because later in my teen years, and more so now, I can kind of just come to you with anything. I've never felt scared to tell you if I did something wrong or if I needed any help. I think you've done a great job providing that space for me. But let's dive into the expectations, and how it varied with different generations, because you would tell me stories on how that probably wasn't the case one generation ago. That kind of relationship wasn't as acceptable, or it wasn't as normal. So what do you think about our dynamic now versus, let's say, how the expectations that were put on you guys before?
Well, first of all, I really loved you as a child. I loved Richard the kid. And there was really a period when I really did miss the child in you. I always tease him that when he was a kid, he couldn't read yet. So every time we would drive by a billboard, he'd say, "What's that?" Because he couldn't read it. So I would explain what it is. Now I go to him for every single thing. How do you do this? How do you do that? How
Share
you
this post. How do you do that?
no, I just got a new car. How do you move this? How do you do that? Totally dumb when it comes. So it's sort of like role reversal, and then slowly seeing you take on leadership. You're now part of this team, and you've got your buddies coming around and your sisters, and I think it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see you grow up and becoming your own person, having your own opinion, and respecting that. But yeah, the dynamic of you as a child was wonderful, but you now as an adult, a young adult, is also really so astonishing. How God moved in our lives, son, by putting us together, were just a series of miracles that I keep telling him, I know and I know and I know that God has a great plan for you. Kasi ginamit lang ako para ma-fulfill yun. I come from an illustrious Ilonggo family. And I remember bringing Richard to our home in Iloilo, our ancestral home in Iloilo. And I told him one time, because it really hit me when I realized how God plans for the generations. I told him, look at all these people, these generations, and how they worked so hard to build a certain stature in life. And I said the fact that the Lord crossed our paths and that you're going to benefit out of generations of hard work. And I want you to really understand the expanse of that godly plan. You just didn't get lucky. You know what I'm saying? It's like God has a plan for your life. He made our lives cross so that you can fulfill whatever He's going to do, because now you're going to be able. You have been educated. You have been surrounded by people, good people. You have been well provided for. You have everything you need. And that's how I look at it. That's how I look at this relationship. It is God ordained. Yeah, what a blessing it is to be a father. When I see men, and I see men who say, I'm not close to my dad, it really becomes a burden for me. And that's why Richard and I have long talked about doing a podcast about fathers and sons, because this is probably one of the most important relationships there are in life. You said in the last episode that moms are there to nurture. The father is the one that gives identity. And if you don't have that, you're lost most of your life. And this is both for sons and daughters. Kung ang nanay ay haligi o ilaw ng tahanan, the father is really the foundation of the house. So if that father isn't someone that a child can stand on and know that I'm secure in my father, then it's going to be shaky ground for the rest of his life or her life. Most men don't know how to father because it's generational.
Yep.
So kung paano ka ni-raise ng tatay mo, yun ka rin. Unless there are some people who break out of it and say, you know what? I don't want to be like my dad, so I'm going to be the complete opposite. And that's what happened to me.
But it takes an immense amount of unlearning because it's what you said, generational. You don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Like whatever you were exposed to at the time kind of shapes your, your thought patterns and how you think about things, overall outlook. So imagine generations of, maybe misunderstood father and son relationships, may have already shaped, parang a certain stereotype of what father and sons are supposed to be. I think that's the journey that a lot of people will have to take. I don't know the answer. Is it a mix of, awareness, a mix of conscious effort towards, unlearning certain behaviors? Like for you, you did mention that your dad wasn't around all the time. How did you kind of unpack that with yourself? Because I don't know that, you had someone really point it out and kind of do the opposite with us.
Yeah, my father kasi was he worked in Iloilo because he was running our farms and we were based here in Manila. So he would only come maybe once a month or maybe stay a week. So it's not that he was absentee because he didn't care. He just wasn't physically there. So I went through school never ever having had my father bring me. He never ever went to anything I ever did. The only time he saw me was in my first performance in rep. And he enjoyed it, you know. Ang upbringing kasi ng tatay ko because they were rich before and then they became poor. So ang kanyang orientation is the way I show my love to my family is I'll provide. So great provider siya. And he was a protector. As I told you before, my oldest sister would make cuento that every night he would go around the house and lock everything, make sure that every door is locked. So that is his expression of love. He would compel us to kiss him as a sign of respect, which I hated. I had to kiss this guy all the time, but never told me I love you. Never hugged me in my life, never said anything that might build my ego. When I slowly evolved to start fathering you, into starting to father you, I guess it was my healing. I instinctively knew what I did not have as a child, as a son, and my healing was to be everything my father wasn't to you. So to tell you I love you all the time. We hug all the time. We start and end our day with a hug.
Yeah.
Then the fact that my father never spent time with it, I made sure I'm always around Richard. There's healing in acknowledging that there's a lack in your life. Ano sabi ng kapatid ni Tito Jaime? Na you can only blame your parents so much. And after that, you already take control of your life, right? So I guess it's that conscious effort of, okay, so this was what was lacking when I was growing up. So I'm going to make sure that Richard doesn't have this. When he was growing up, and you mentioned it kanina, because he grew up in a house of women. Puro babae dyan sa bahay mo eh. Siya yung isang lalaki, right?
Yeah.
So I knew that instinctively. I also grew up in a house na puro my mom, my sisters, my yayas and everything, and my father would just come in and go, and I didn't like that feeling. So I wanted to make sure that he would be able to explore and become the man that he was made to be. And what is that book that we so loved?
Wild at Heart.
Wild at Heart. We're not homemakers. We are supposed to go out there and conquer. That's how we were ever since cavemen pa tayo, right? The men would go out and hunt, and I think if you don't understand that, you'll act out differently.
As Dad mentioned, he's a little more expressive. He's the actor. He's the performer, and so, very transparent with how he's feeling. Didn't quite rub off on me as much. I'm a little more reserved, maybe less.
Controlled.
Yeah, a little more control. Going back to the question of what's one thing you wish the other person knew that I may have never said, and of course, me being a little more reserved and a little, using a little less words. I think it's important that there is nothing that you can do that will make me respect or love you any less. And I hope you know that deep in your heart. I mean, I'm sure you know that I love you, but I hope that you know that no matter how vulnerable you get with me, no matter what confession, what struggle you may be going through, it doesn't change.
Oh, thank you, son. I would tell you, um,
Whatever he's gonna say, he probably already told me, so the question doesn't really apply to him.
yeah, I tell him everything naman eh. If all I ever leave you as a child is the ability to know right from wrong, I would have done my job. Yun parati kong binabantayan hanggang ngayon. As long as I know that you know, I know you'll be fine. And so just guard that. Always choose your crowd and change the world in your own way.
Pressure.
In your own way.
And you're like, well, that's all we have for today's episode. And the next episode, still continuing with our father and son series, of course, we're gonna dive into maybe a little bit of dad's history, a little bit more on the fatherhood talk, but more about how his experience may have shaped his outlook and his practices with fatherhood. I enjoyed this episode. It was nice.
Yeah?
You like it?
I don't know. We'll have to watch it.